Hello, my name is Christopher Walls, and I'm with NetGain. I'm joined by John and Brandon today. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar about cloud migration and getting value from the cloud. We're going to start here in just a couple of minutes, but I wanted to go ahead and get the room open, and yeah, we'll get started here in probably just about 2 minutes or so. Thank you again. See some more people filing in. We'll get started here in just about a minute or so. It's going to give a little bit about 60 seconds extra time for people to get in, and then we will get started. Thank you again for joining us. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. So, uh, thanks again for joining us. My name is Christopher Walls. I'll be kind of moderating and mediating and emceeing us through today's webinar on the cloud, making it rain, pulling value from the cloud is what we've titled this, and really that just gets to the larger business questions around cloud migration and what that means and how you can get business value and achieve goals, achieve your goals through using cloud platforms. So I am joined today by John Adams and Brandon Brewer. They're both members of the NetGain Technologies team. The NetGain Technologies is a managed service provider headquartered in central Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, but we serve the surrounding area. John is our director of professional services. In that role, he leads a team of engineers. How many engineers are on your team, John?
11.
11. A team of 11 engineers. Some of our most experienced, most veteran, most certified engineers that we have here at NetGain, and they do all sorts of large projects for our clients. Anything from like cloud migration, setting up on-premise data solutions. John could probably go more into it about exactly what all they do, but some of our larger projects that require quite a high level of expertise and ability. And one of those engineers on his team is Brandon Brewer, who joins us today with nearly 20 years. We figured that out just a little bit before this call. Nearly 20 years of IT experience, and primarily today helps the small and medium-sized organizations move to Microsoft Azure, which may not mean a whole lot right now to you. May not know what Azure is. That's okay. That's probably why you're here. But we will make sure that we define that. Essentially, Azure is Microsoft's cloud offering, but John and Brandon will get more into that as we move through today's presentation. So, what are we going to talk about? Our focus overall is on moving from what you'll probably hear us say on premise quite a bit. We will move from on premise infrastructures, which could be stacks of servers, things like that, physical hardware that sits in a building that your organization owns. Taking that and moving it to the cloud. Specifically, we're going to focus on Microsoft Azure. John and Brandon will get more into that. There's all sorts of different cloud platforms you can use. If we wanted to open this thing up to everything you could potentially use, we would be here for days. So we're focusing on Azure. That's also just where our company's expertise is and where John and Brandon's expertise is. So just focusing in our discussion there. So some things that we'll take a look at is, what do you need to do to actually move your systems to a cloud provider? What are the costs associated with that? Is it more expensive? How is it more expensive? And more importantly, what sort of value are you getting from that? What sort of benefits? And then towards the end of our presentation, we'll have a pretty handy list of questions that you can ask yourself about your organization to determine if migrating to the cloud is right for you, because frankly, it's not the right solution for everybody. And we will have time at the end to do a bit of Q&A with John and Brandon. And to do that, I'll call out the questions panel on your GoToWebinar selection of menus. You should see a drop down that says questions. You should also see one that says chat. You can use either of those to ask a question of John and Brandon. We will save those until the end, and we'll make sure to get through all of those by the time we're out of here today. And with that, before we actually get started and before I throw it to John and Brandon, I would like to ask a quick question of everybody in the room. Here in just a second, you should see your screen go from our presentation to a quick multiple choice question that asks, does your organization currently use cloud platforms? Feel free to go ahead and click and submit. Just interested to see what you all think. Run for a couple seconds here. And it looks like there's a resounding yes that your organization does use cloud platforms. I was maybe expecting a few people to say I'm not sure, and then we could hit them with the well, actually, this webinar is hosted on the cloud, but apparently you all already understand that. So I'll throw it to John here, but the quick answer is yes, you're almost certainly already using cloud platforms if you're any sort of modern business. But John, if you want to take it from here to give us this nebulous cloud a bit more of a definition.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for everyone that joined here today. So sounds like all you guys are familiar with the cloud. As Chris highlighted, really in this webinar, we're going to speak about moving your infrastructure up to the cloud. There's a lot of different forms of cloud, and cloud is such a general term. Some of the main ones that are used by, I think, all of us are more of this SaaS, software as a service. So that could be Gmail, it could be 365, it could be QuickBooks Online. So that's a version of cloud that a lot of us are familiar with. And as Chris mentioned, we're running this particular webinar through a software as a service application. Infrastructure as a service is really virtualized computer resources that are accessed over the internet. So these are very similar to the servers that you guys have in your data center, in your server room. However, they're just virtualized. And that includes not just the compute, the CPUs, but also the storage and networking. So when we're talking about those pieces of the cloud, we're going to refer to as infrastructure as a service. And really, as Chris mentioned as well, we're a Microsoft shop. We focus on Azure, but I'm going to hit on a lot of this stuff so that the principles are the same, whether you're inside of AWS, Google's cloud platform, or Azure, or maybe even Alibaba's cloud.
And AWS being Amazon Web Services, just to set that definition, right, John?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And then the nebulous definition of the cloud is difficult, and I think the adjective makes a lot of sense. But very easily, the cloud is just somebody else's really awesome computer systems that are efficient, protected, safe, energy efficient, and then we're just taking a small chunk of those and creating our own virtual resources from it. So there's a lot of different things you can put in front of as a service. So you see SaaS, you see IaaS, that's what we're talking about here today. But we also have platform as a service, function as a service, database as a service, communications as a service. The list goes on. You can pretty much pick any alphabet letter, throw it in front of it, and they'll have a cloud variant as a service for it. But the first thing that we need to do is see if Azure is the right fit for you, or cloud in general. So who are the right candidates for Azure? We need to know a couple things about you guys, or businesses that are looking to move to a provider like Azure. So the cloud's built for everyone. It can work for everyone, but that doesn't mean that all businesses should move to the cloud. You might have workloads that are a little bit too tedious to host up there. The cost may not make sense. So normally what you do if you work with somebody like us is we try to understand your business model and how you guys are actually using that data. What type of data it is. Is it a ton of images, drawing files? Is it just documents? And then also we need to understand what your current infrastructure looks like. If you guys are hosting an extreme amount of storage locally, it may not make sense to move it up to Azure unless we can figure out a clever way. We're going to go over costs inside of Azure a little bit later on, but you'll see that most everything in Azure resource-wise has a cost to it. So it could be a cost to the actual compute, or it could be a cost to the actual data moving in and out of there. So understanding the total cost of ownership of moving you guys to Azure compared to maintaining on-premise is something that we need to figure out early on before we start going down this road. And then really understanding what your main applications that you guys are working on. Now, there's a ton of applications out there now that have a software as a service offering. And in that case, we wouldn't have to move infrastructure up to Azure. So understanding those main applications and workloads, and then also, of course, how your employees and customers connect to your environments is very important. Some of you guys are running completely remote shops. That could make sense for you. How your clients connect could make sense. And the one thing, I'm gonna hit on this a couple times, but obviously if we're gonna move everything up to the internet, having adequate bandwidth is very key to that. So a lot of times we've seen some offices that are kind of off the beaten path. They don't have that fast of an internet. The headquarters decides to move everybody up to Azure, and that particular office struggles with it because they just don't have enough bandwidth to do it. So,
and that determining the bandwidth, John, if I can jump in for a second, determining the bandwidth, that's something that a cloud migration team could help you dictate, to help you test and figure out and maybe dial up if you need to, right?
Yeah, ideally, yep. You guys should be able to run a speed test, and a lot of times we can increase the bandwidth as provided from your ISP. But sometimes, like I said, you're a little bit too remote where they don't have fiber. You know, they may have just barely something better in dial-up, which is going to be a little bit of a struggle to work with some of this modern cloud technology.
Yeah, I would add that we typically do that as part of a cloud assessment prior to going to the cloud, reviewing the business needs, and like John said on the earlier slide, reviewing what or how the business operates and applications they have, and going through all that and making that determination up front.
Yep. So now let's talk about, all right, we've gotten the answers to these questions. Y'all seem like a good fit. What's it going to take to move to the cloud? Can anybody do it? Not necessarily. So I think that you do need the right people for the job. A CSP, somebody like NetGain that spends a lot of time in training, certifications to understand cloud. And we had mentioned earlier on that we have a group of 11 engineers, but we also have project managers, project coordinators on the team as well. And these cloud migrations really do take a lot. We've had some that have been 6-month engagements. You know, we've had some that have been a month, some that have been a couple weeks, but there's a lot of moving parts to it. And some of y'all may have internal IT or help desk there and looking to have them maybe migrate you guys to the cloud. I think that's a little bit tricky to do. It's definitely not always a one-to-one in system knowledge. Just because somebody knows systems in the traditional sense doesn't mean they know them inside of the cloud. So some of that foundational knowledge transfers over, but not all of it. And having a provider like us or anybody out there that has done this is hugely beneficial, because as we have on here, managing the costs can be difficult. So we're going to go over the costs in a little bit more detail, but I'm going to keep on hammering that there is cost associated to most all the resources in here, and letting those accidentally run can really change the bill. So another reason to work with somebody, a CSP, is it may be hard to have a small business be able to justify staffing a full-time cloud engineer. And it may take some time to actually train and certify your current engineers to be able to support this. So a lot of businesses out there like us that can help you guys along this journey.
I'll jump in really quick if you don't mind, John, and just say, I saw just a couple last week when we were pulling this together, there was an interesting stat from the Wall Street Journal that looked at the number of cloud engineering positions that remained open last year, so in 2022, and it was 63% of cloud engineering jobs. Not quite for sure how they exactly define that. That could be, everything from, fairly entry level to fairly high level, but 63% of them remained open. So not only could it be difficult to actually, justify the amount of time and spend to staff a cloud expert, a cloud engineer, it seems that it's a difficult role to fill in general. It's quite competitive out there. So
yep.
Just wanted to jump in with that, but thanks, John.
No problem. All right, so you guys got the right people in here. We here at NetGain, we follow really best practices, and that's Microsoft's kind of cloud adoption framework. And it's basically a set of guidelines and best practices and resources that are designed to help businesses navigate and streamline their cloud adoption journey. So we just need to ensure that businesses adopt well the cloud services with confidence. We mitigate risks and really just achieve the overall business objectives. So part of that framework includes these 7 steps here. So strategy is obviously very important. That's where we'll define the business justifications, look to define the desired outcomes. This would include stuff like cost management, benefit mapping, business case development. And the next thing we do on here is we're going to start planning for it. So that's where we're going to kind of align actionable cloud adoption plans with business strategies and priorities. So here we're going to be looking at skills readiness. Do we have the right skills needed, not just for the deployment, but also afterwards to continue support on it? We'll do kind of the initial architectural design and then start building out the actual cloud environment setup. So as we're moving along here, we move into this ready part of the framework. That's where we're actually going to be preparing the cloud environment. So this might be building the foundation, setting up landing zone, governance models, implementing best practices in terms of security and compliance. So we're really getting the cloud environment ready to go here. So we got a strategy, we got a good plan, we're getting things ready for it. So now let's start the adoption part on here. This is where we're going to actually look to migrate some of the workloads that you guys have up to the cloud. So at this point in time, included in the strategy and planning, it might make sense for us to use different parts of the cloud. So that's playing with that alphabet soup in front of the AAS. So once we adopt it, we're going to migrate applications, data, infrastructure, or like I said, build a new solution that makes more sense with y'all's business. So after that, we'll move on to the govern section of it. And that's basically just us ensuring that management and compliance of cloud services is here too. So that might be implementing policies, blueprints, guardrails to manage and monitor services and resources. As I mentioned a little while ago, you might accidentally spin up a couple servers just to play with, but if you don't delete them the right way and terminate them from the subscription, you could continue to be billed for it. That's probably one of the bigger issues we see, is people being a little bit too gung-ho with it, spinning stuff up and not taking it down, and then all of a sudden they have a much larger bill and wonder why. And as well as the security part is obviously a very big deal. So moving on to step 6, that's going to be manage. So that's using the functionality inside of Azure or whatever monitoring systems you may have that we'll use to monitor it, maintain it, operate, and then continue to optimize it. So this would include performance monitoring, operational compliance, and then ongoing optimization. We may see down the road how a certain workload works, and there might be room to improve it, make it more efficient. And then of course, very important is cost management on here. And once we get to the cost section, you'll understand that a little bit more. But this goes back to, again, having a skilled team handle this for you and set up a lot of these guardrails, alerts, notifications, so that things don't get out. And the last part of it is just innovate. So once you're inside that cloud space, you have access to all sorts of tools, features, top-notch security options. So here we're looking to really innovate at this point. So if we can leverage cloud native capabilities to drive innovation, that's what we're trying to do here. So this might be, like we're saying, maybe using some of the PaaS or CaaS, other SaaS tools, but we're just looking to do continuous improvement on that and yeah, digitally transform some of your initiatives in the right direction. So this particular framework has worked great, and I think it's because it hits on 3 key points when it comes to moving to an infrastructure as a service provider. So can you hit that slide for me, Chris? There you go, perfect, awesome. All right, so very important. No problem. Business alignment. So we got to make sure that we're aligned. This is a journey, and it takes a good bit of change to just understand it. And to your users, there may not be very much change at all, right? But how it's built, how it's maintained, secured, is a different beast. So being aligned with you guys to ensure that our efforts support your overall business goals is key, and the Microsoft Cloud Adaption Framework really helps that. So also the cultural transformation. So there is a shift in organizational culture and mindset, especially when they know that, hey, we don't need to have anybody in the office to access stuff. We don't need to use VPN. We can start accessing things where we need to and start making use of newer tools, right? So some of your employees may have a different version of the application that they're using, and some of them may be very similar. And then the other thing that I touched on right at the beginning is just the technical best practices. So implementing those proven and secure methods to maximize the benefit of the cloud. This is very key, right? Not just for your pocketbooks, but also for the security of it. We've come across a few different cases where we've been pulled in where somebody has made some changes on their own, accidentally left a port open to the public. Somebody got in there, spun a bunch of machines up to do Bitcoin mining, and the client ended up having to pay close to 100 grand for that. And you know, if only they had called us before they went to this, maybe it wouldn't have been a big issue. and we could have kind of audited and ensured that those best practices are in there. So that's kind of the first part of us moving there. Like we said, first we want to identify if you guys are the right type of company for it. Will your workloads and applications work great in there? And then if it is, then we need to learn, plan together, make this a team effort. And then obviously go through the deployment process to get you guys moved up there. And if we can do all that, that's in great shape. But then we got to start thinking about the costs here. So the costs of services inside of the cloud is going to be a little bit different compared to kind of our traditional on-premise model, where maybe we're really used to having some type of large capital expenditures in there. So that is one of the huge benefits when it comes to costs inside of the cloud, is the operational versus capital expenditure. So OpEx is favored a lot, although I know there's people that still prefer the capital expenditure. But as we're seeing with subscription models all over the place, you know, if people are able to pay monthly for it, it seems to be a little bit easier to swallow for them. So with that being said, cloud is billed based on usage. So we're thinking like a utility bill. The amount of power that you take, you pay the power company a certain amount, right? You're paying for what you use. Same with water, whatever it may be. So as much as you use is what you pay, and each part of it has different costs to it. So thankfully, Azure, AWS, Google, they do give us a couple different payment models. So I'm going to cover the Azure ones right now. So here we go. So pay as you go. This is very easy. It's month-to-month billed on usage. It is one of the more expensive options, but it does give you the ability to spin stuff up, spin it down, test with it, or you know, maybe you guys are preparing for a sell, you know, and you're looking to have no real commitments to it because it's going to offload to whoever's buying your business. I'm not sure, so maybe month to month may go good. Also, maybe if you're just dipping your toes in here and you want to see maybe a couple servers work well in there, maybe pay as you go makes sense. If you're looking to save a little bit of money on it, they do offer something called reserved instances. So this would be you committing to, you know, a 1 or 3 year term for specific virtual machines. So we're going to go over some of the different costs that are associated inside of Azure or whatever provider you may choose. But this right here is really just on the virtual machine. So when I say virtual machine, I mostly mean your servers. So your servers, right now as you have them, they're spec'd with certain CPU sizes, memory, storage. So when we reserve an instance, we're saying that, hey, this particular server, we want to keep it for 1 to 3 years, right? It might be something that you know isn't going to change or fluctuate or needs to scale as much. So you're saying, hey, let's commit to this. And if we go for 1 year commit on it, we're saving 40%. That's significant. If we want to do 3 years, that's 60%. So server that might cost us $200 month to month, right, is costing us you know, roughly around $100 if we go 40 or 60 on it. So another option, so in the reserved instances, we are committing to a specific virtual machine type, right? A specific server type. The other option that they give us here is a savings plan. So this means that we're committing to an overall Azure spend on our compute. So we're still talking about the server part of it, right? Not networking and other features. But we're saying, hey, Azure, we're willing to commit to spending $8,000 a month to host our infrastructure up there. So if you agree to that amount, they'll give you a solid discount on it. It's okay if you go over it, you just pay the normal rates. So this is a little bit more flexible than the reserved instances. The reserved instance kind of locks you into that particular VM series, that instance of it. And the savings plan lets you kind of be a little bit more flexible with the type of compute selection that you guys end up going with. So I mentioned just a moment ago that there are some other costs inside of Azure. This is one place where I think there is a little bit of a misconception because people can look on the internet, look at Azure Calculator, AWS's, and say, oh, you know, my server here, I can get it for $100 a month and they'll just host it. It sounds like a deal, but you got to remember there's other parts to this, right? The server is just the computing resources on it. That doesn't include the storage. So now our $100 a month server, maybe we got to add a little bit of storage. So now it's 110. And then the licensing aspect of it. So Microsoft does something really great where they give you an option that includes licensing with it. But it does increase the price. So you're still paying for it. It's just kind of spread out over, you know, your individual monthly payments to it. They do give us something nice called Azure Hybrid Benefit. That means some of you guys that already purchased maybe a 2019 license or 2016 license, 2022, they're allowing you to bring that with you to Azure so that you're not having to incur the cost of extra licensing on there. It seems minimal, but it actually can make a very large difference in the overall cost of it. And then, all right, so we got our compute, we got it licensed, it's got some storage, we probably got to do some backup on it. That's going to cost us a little bit more as well. And then also to secure it. So it gives you access to a lot of these security features, and you do get some of them included in there, but we want to add more bells and whistles to make things a little bit more secure. That ends up with a little bit of a cost on there as well. So now we got a good system up there. It's licensed, it's backed up, it's secured. We got to get to it now. So now we're looking at the connections to the cloud. So we can't just put the system up there and just let it sit out there on the internet, probably get hacked or something bad would happen to it. So we got to build a connection between your office or your users. To do that, we're going to need a firewall, right? With that firewall, we can then create VPNs. Azure does have a native VPN as well that we use at times, but we do like using Fortinet firewalls in the cloud version of it, so a virtualized version of it. From there, we can start making use of the site-to-site VPNs to link your office back to it. So we have some clients that have, you know, an office with nothing but networking resources in there. All their servers and everything else is elsewhere. So we can create that tunnel between those two locations. And then we can also create tunnels for employees that are nowhere near that office, right? They're just full remote. Or if you're already fully remote, great. We can just create it from your users up to here. So I keep threading in here this thing about the cost management, because this is, as you can see now, we're talking about this, it can start to sneak up on you, right? And when I had mentioned earlier on, like really defining your business goals and how you guys work is a huge part of it. So when Azure, AWS, a lot of these providers charge you nothing to bring your data in there. This is a very smart move on their part, right? Because now they have your data. So it's free to get the data in there, but it can incur some cost when you're actually pulling the data out. So that's at egress bandwidth. So it's very minimal. It might be a fraction of a penny per gigabyte, but once we assess y'all's systems and we see exactly how much data you guys are churning out of there, we might be looking at, wow, you guys are moving tons of movies or images files that are really large, and that could end up costing you guys extra hundreds and hundreds, or if not thousands of dollars. So that's, again, we're making use of a cloud architect, someone that can actually design the solution that will consider that type of stuff, so that you know, we can actually see a benefit in the costs coming up there. And then really understanding that Azure cost management tool is very important. So we can set it to alert if costs get out of control. We can put budgets on certain items. So almost that one service inside of here it takes it quite the amount of skill just to understand that and set it up properly. Because again, we don't want, you know, even these costs that I'm telling you here right now, they can vary, but we want to do our best to kind of get a good estimate of what they're going to be, so that you're not, we don't want you to all of a sudden get an $11,000 bill and it come out of nowhere. If we're the ones doing the work, we would know before it even got to that point if there was an issue, as you would know as well, depending on how we do the notifications for it. All right.
So Yeah,
All
I
right.
was just saying we're about to jump into cloud benefits here. Sorry, give me just a second. So really quick, if I can give you a break for a second, John. What I've really been getting from this quite a bit is how scalable the cloud can be and how easily you can, you know, dial it dial it up and down, right? And that frankly can also mean how you can dial your costs up and down, right? And I think you're going to get a bit into this and how it kind of modernizes your IT, right? And then, but I guess when we move past this a bit, I'll be interested to see like the kind of ideal business that a cloud migration could fit. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into this.
Sure. All right. So, we've defined a lot of stuff getting to this point. You guys have everything in the cloud. We have a good plan. So what are the benefits? I just went over the costs and told you that, hey, they're going to get you on all sorts of stuff. Your egress bandwidth, the storage, the networking, a lot of these things. So where are the benefits? If we did the total cost of ownership and we see, hey, these look very similar, maybe we'd say, let's just stick with what we got. We'll just take the large capital expenditure and just continue doing business as we're doing. That could make sense for you, but there is a good chance to find savings, especially if we can move a lot of your workloads into SaaS or other solutions. But there are some huge benefits just being in a modern environment like Azure. So as Chris just mentioned, the cloud infrastructure is highly scalable. So that's scalable up or down, right? So say your business has different cycles to it, where maybe during the seasonal times it's very busy, we may need to scale the systems up, or we may need to add more to them. But then it slows down when it gets to January, so we might need to bring it back. So again, since we're paying per resource and how much it's used, this is how we can kind of start controlling costs. The scalable feature of spinning things up, I'm sure you guys have worked with folks like us or others that can order the hardware. We can take some time for us to get it in here, get it configured. When it comes to cloud, we can normally spin that server up in 30 minutes from anywhere in the world with an internet connection, start working on it. The other thing is it modernizes your infrastructure, right? So now you're able to use a lot of the features that are considered more modern. So a little bit better security options, a little bit better CPUs, even though they're virtualized, a little bit faster storage. And again, we're able to scale it up and down if we need. So maybe you don't need as fast at some point in time. So the other thing that's great is your data, and it's being highly available. So we get a ton of redundancy options, whether it's local redundancy, geo redundancy, depending on how your business operates, maybe there's a need to have a failover or another part of your infrastructure in a different part of the world, right? Maybe you have a large base that is out there in Europe, makes sense to have some redundancy go over there, or you're worried that, hey, if anything happens to this great country here, what do? Luckily, we got some type of redundancy that's bringing us down to Argentina if that happens. So the other great benefit is just a single invoice for all of these services. When you're getting networking from one provider, your servers from another provider, a storage from another provider, it's kind of all over the place. And this gives us just one single invoice for all the services. So it's very, very easy to pay for, and then of course you'll get a detailed list of everything that's on there, but we're no longer paying 4 or 5 vendors, we're just paying through one, which is nice. And then the no on-premise hardware to manage or upgrade, right? So even though these servers are up in the cloud, they still need to be upgraded with the latest version, or it's easy to do, and they make it that it can be done obviously remotely. So not having any of that on-premise hardware to deal with if it goes down, cleaning it, having staffing people that need to be on site to actually deal with it. These are a lot of soft benefits that we see, And we can go even deeper with that when it comes to reducing energy costs. So this is one way I can justify moving to the cloud. A lot of us kind of just pay our power bill, but if we're thinking about it as utility billing, I think it gets lost that a lot of the times energy costs for on-premise solutions actually affected a decent amount. So an average server costs about $700 a year for it to run, right? And then we think about a server and storage and networking, and those things generate a ton of heat. So believe it or not, you're tagging that air conditioning bill a decent amount as well. So there's a lot of little soft benefits that you can see in here that may not be on that first layer that can pay some dividends to you. The other thing is when we're talking about modernizing your infrastructure, obviously Azure, AWS, Google's cloud are all modern. And specifically inside of Azure, they do have the Azure Marketplace. So all these other providers that you might work with, I mentioned Fortinet earlier, Meraki, so many providers actually have a virtualized version of their particular appliance, software, or firewall, whatever it may be. So you have really easy access to do that. So if your systems are already all running on a Fortinet network, no problem. We can add the virtual Fortinet device into Azure so everything continues to mesh very well together. And I believe that there's hundreds of options inside that marketplace. Might be for Salesforce, some CRM platform. They normally have a solution that works with some of this modern solutions. And then the access to advanced security features. When we're talking about different vendors and suppliers, it can get tricky with that. But once you're inside the cloud, again, you got access to all sorts of modern features. So very easy for you to go into XDR. You can have a SIM in there. You can have all sorts of great security functionality. And then Microsoft is very good when it comes to compliance and governance, especially for regulated industries. So when it comes to government, they have multiple cloud options for it, depending on the type of work you may do with the government. Of course, they have the public option that can be used by anybody. And then we have kind of a standard government that can be used. And then we have a high GCC is what they call it. And that'd be for business that are doing work with the Department of Defense. They have more stringent kind of guidelines that they need to follow. So those are just some of the benefits that you can see once you guys get up there. All right.
If I could jump in really quick before this, if you had to kind of framework out an ideal business for the cloud, what would you frame that as? I'll throw it toward Brandon, because we haven't heard too much from Brandon. But what would be briefly an ideal, a cloud migrant?
I don't think there's a specific. Some of the things that John touched on, it's important that the business have good connectivity. There are certain applications that may not be well suited for the cloud. A lot of those have databases that reside on separate systems and a client application that resides on the endpoint. In those cases, the endpoints, the latency between the on-premise network and the actual endpoint and the back-end system may be too great. And so the application would perform poorly. There are ways around that, but as you go, work around those scenarios, you're increasing costs because you're adding infrastructure to then support those applications further. So, for example, you might shift to a virtualized VDF virtual desktop environment that runs in Azure, and then your users would then connect to that environment to access that application. As far as so as long as your business doesn't have any connectivity issues or any applications that are latency sensitive, if you have a lot of cloud apps already, there might be even a scenario where we even leave Azure entirely and you're using something like Microsoft 365 and Azure AD to transition your identity platform to for authentication. And in those cases, it reduces your on-premise footprint and really your server infrastructure footprint to near zero in those cases. Also, I think mobile workforces or mobile businesses that have a lot of mobile employees, centralizing in the cloud is great. No, not a lot of physical buildings, which they work too, but mobility is important, and you can bring the services closer to the users based on region, that sort of thing.
It obviously promotes that remote access, right?
Mhm.
Well, anything would you like to add, John, or just as far as it's who is the a good fit for cloud applications?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can add some flavor to some of the stuff we have on here, but some of the clients that we deal with that are dealing with very far out of date applications is very difficult to move you guys to the cloud. So if you're using a custom application that was made by some guy that used to work there from 2002, and it runs on a really old end of life server, that's very tricky for us to get up there. So custom applications, normally is it tricky, it can be done. And then also I touch on this a little bit, but the seasonal business aspect is really good. We have some camps that really spin everything up for 4 months out of the year and then spin it all down. And then Brandon mentioned this, but folks that are looking to get rid of their office space is normally key. They want to go to a full remote, mobile workers. We've had some people turn down moving to the cloud and move all of their server hardware to the CEO's garage. Let you know, it didn't turn out that great, and we ended up moving them up to Azure shortly afterwards. So those would be good. I would say definitely businesses that are starting up, that are really looking to grow and test the waters. The scalability is very favorable to be able to scale it up and down as the business grows, or hopefully does not decline. And then the last thing, you got a great internet connection, right? If you got a good internet connection, that helps us out a lot.
Awesome. So we have some time left over for Q&A here, about 10 or 15 minutes or so, it looks like. At this time, I'll just remind everybody that you can use the questions or chat window. Really, either one will get to me, and we can make sure that it gets to John and Brandon. We have a couple here that I'll start off with, but if you have anything for John or Brandon about cloud, it may be a question around if your particular business. It looks like we have a pretty good representation of different types of organizations here. So anything at all? And if we can't answer it today, which I'm sure they can probably answer most things today, but if we can't, we will get back to you as soon as possible with a good answer. But let's see, I'm going to kick it off here with a question around manufacturing and the manufacturing industry specifically, John and Brandon. Oftentimes the person here says that they have manufacturing software on presses on the line. Is that going to cause a major problem with migrating to the cloud? And how would you all approach that?
Yeah, no, it shouldn't. I mean, there's definitely a lot of businesses that start to build their applications out in the cloud that can work with these press machines or manufacturing machines. But when we're talking about the cloud, you don't have to go all the way in on it. We can do still a hybrid model. So if that particular piece of machinery has some necessary software that needs to live locally where the equipment is, we can still keep that there, and then we can bridge it to what we have up in a cloud provider. So when we spoke about building those VPNs or tunnels between, really we're just extending that network cable from what used to be your server room is now spread out amongst the Azure server infrastructure.
Gotcha. And you'd mentioned this kind of briefly on a couple of the different points you made, but this person says that they're looking to move to a fully distributed, fully remote workforce. I would assume that means probably over several states, if I had to guess, or maybe even, across the whole nation. But would a fully cloud migration help support that? And what would they need to look out for? I would assume, if I had to guess, the fact that these people are accessing, business systems through their own networks would probably put them at the very least at needing a VPN, right?
A
I would
VPN
assume,
could work
yeah,
well for those. Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
VPN could work well for those users. I think it's highly suitable, as I said before, that it's great for mobile workforce. But yeah, Fortinet, if we were using that type of firewall, or also that's the case for Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365, where those mobile workers could access a cloud PC running Windows 11, and can actually perform their work on that PC. And so the data ultimately resides in the cloud. Don't have to worry about data loss. In those cases, the mobile workers could even bring their own PC. A lot of companies do that, or even provide some funding for the employee to buy their own PC, and then from the worker perspective, they leverage the cloud PC in that case. But yeah, you can also use site-to-site or client VPNs to Azure using Azure VPN Gateway or the FortiGate. And then in other cases, it might be your application might be suitable to deploy to the cloud using Platform as a Service, and then actually host it. Maybe it's a web-based application, and you can move that entire application to the cloud. And then employees would access that application directly over the internet.
great. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Looks like that's all we have at this time. But if anybody in the room does have a question, please feel free to go ahead and put it in. But I'm just going to kind of wrap up here with a couple of things. One, saying thank you for joining us. I'm also going to launch another poll. This one in a bit of a different manner than the first. This is just, if you'd like to hear more from us, or if you are considering a cloud migration and you would like to get in contact with us, please, let us know, and we'll make sure that the right people, maybe John and Brandon, can reach out to you. Also today, after the webinar actually closes down, there'll be a brief 2-question satisfaction survey. Should take all of about 30 seconds to complete. We would appreciate that if you have the time. But other than that, we will follow up with you with this slide deck, as well as a link to the recording to this, so you can obviously feel free to share to anybody in your organization or elsewise. But with that, I'll do one last check for questions here. Doesn't look like anything else has come in. So with that, we'll say goodbye and thank you for joining us today. And mostly, thank you, John and Brandon, for lending your time and expertise today.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all.
Yep, thank you, everybody.